Mediterranean Hegemon of Ancient Greece chapter 1309 to chapter 1319. Furthermore, the Devers once had a worry: how would they cross the wide Euphrates River under the heavy defenses of the Persia army? However, with the retreat of the Persia army, this worry was no longer a problem. In the past few days, the engineering battalion had built 3 wooden bridges across the Orontes River in front of the camp. The 150,000 soldiers crossed the Orontes River in an orderly manner and marched eastward in a grandiose manner. 6 days later, the vanguard troops were approaching Thapsacus. The Euphrates River, which flowed out of the mountains in the eastern part of Asia Minor, flowed from north to south through the westernmost part of the Mesopotamian plain, and converged with many other rivers to form a series of wide lakes. When it reached Thapsacus, it turned eastward, causing the river to narrow suddenly. Thapsacus became the best crossing point for the upper reaches of the Euphrates River. The royal road of the Persia kingdom to Asia Minor passed through here, and this was the reason why the city of Thapsacus thrived. When the Daionia vanguard troops arrived at the west bank of the Euphrates River, they were surprised to find that the Persia army did not burn the pontoon bridge when they retreated. The pontoon bridge was very wide, and it could accommodate 10 soldiers walking side by side at the same time. This saved the engineering battalion the trouble of building another pontoon bridge. The next day, the Devers followed the main army to the west bank of the Euphrates River. He stopped by the pontoon bridge, his eyes fixed on the soldiers in unlined clothes, carrying weapons and armor on their backs. There was a look of longing on their faces as they stepped firmly onto the pontoon bridge, crossed the wide Euphrates River, and set foot on the unfamiliar Mesopotamian plain. The Devers on horseback ignored the fatigue. He straightened his upper body, placed his right fist on his left chest, and looked solemn. The palace guards who followed him also saluted the soldiers. The soldiers who passed by the bridgehead were at first astonished, before becoming immeasurably excited. However, the long queue that rolled forward did not allow anyone to stop, while the heavy bags on their shoulders prevented them from doing anything. Hence, the young soldiers who were mostly born in Daionia and grew up under the influence of countless victories and glory gazed with immeasurable reverence at the kingdom's founder, the supreme commander of the kingdom who had created many military miracles. "Long live your majesty," they shouted excitedly. "Victory to your majesty! Victory to his majesty! Long live his majesty!" In the beginning, the scattered shouts soon converged into one, echoing across the bridgehead and quickly spreading to the front and back of the troops. The soldiers who heard the news seemed to have been injected with stimulants, forgetting the exhaustion of the long journey and quickening their pace. Looking at this exciting scene, Epicthetus could not help but sigh. 30 years ago, we were also here. Just like these little guys, we stepped on this pontoon bridge full of hope and entered the fertile Mesopotamian plains ahead. Don't forget, when Menon led us as the vanguard of the entire army, we were the first to enter the Mesopotamian plains. Amyntas, who was half lying on the carriage, said proudly. His lower limbs were paralyzed and he could not walk. Originally, he was carried by the servants in wooden palanquins, but the speed was too slow to keep up with the main army. Therefore, the Devers allowed him to ride in small open carriages. Ever since the army landed in Egypt, his physical condition had been poor due to the lack of acclimatization, but when the army re-embarked on the route of Cyrus the Younger's march to Babylon, his spirit became better. "Amyntas, how dare you say that?" Agathia, who used to belong to another mercenary team, said disdainfully. Back then, Menon rushed to be the vanguard, saying that he wanted to scout the way for the army, but everyone knew that he just wanted to be the first to rush to the Mesopotamian plains to loot, so Cyrus the Younger agreed to his request and then issued an order to the entire army to prohibit looting on the Mesopotamian plains. "Were you disappointed at that time?" "What's there for me to be disappointed about?" Amyntas was about to refute when he suddenly thought of something and deliberately said loudly, "Hieronymus, did you just say we? Don't forget, His Majesty was also one of us back then." As he said that, he also pointed to the Devers standing solemnly in front of him. Hearing this, Agathia, who had always kept a low profile among the old generals, was a little flustered at this time. He hurriedly explained, "Don't talk nonsense, actually, the reason why we joined the mercenary team and served Cyrus the Younger was also to survive." Hieronymus, who used to be the leader of another mercenary team, spoke in time, dispelling Agathia's embarrassment. In fact, even Cyrus the Younger allowed us to loot the Asia Minor many times to solve the shortage of military funds. The reason why he didn't allow us to loot Mesopotamia was probably because he thought that after he won the throne, Mesopotamia would be the core area under his rule, so he didn't want the people here to resent him. Alexis let out a long sigh. Asia Minor is a part of Persia, but neither Cyrus the Younger nor Artaxerxes cherished that vast land. Instead, they treated the people there as foreigners and took whatever they wanted. How could the people of Asia Minor not rebel? How could the people in other parts of Persia be truly loyal to Persia? We should thank the people of Persia for doing this. Because they didn't treat other races as their own, we had the opportunity to invade this vast land and finally defeat this powerful enemy. Matones pointed at the soldiers of the First Legion who were crossing the river and said proudly, "These little guys are luckier than us. We were just tools in the hands of the people of Persia. We died in this foreign land for the sake of the royal family of Persia for no reason. Although they are marching along the same route as us, they are fighting for themselves and for the kingdom. They will create an unprecedented great victory." Well said, Matones. Amyntas leaned back on the seat of the carriage and said with a hint of mockery, "Although you weren't in my team back then, I've heard of you. A strong, brave, but ill-tempered recruit who gave the commander a lot of headaches. No one would have thought that after a few decades, you would become the commander of tens of thousands of soldiers, and speak so logically, Lord Amyntas. I've also heard of you back then." Matones retorted rudely, "Do you know why I didn't want to go to the 100-man team you commanded back then? Because everyone called you a mad dog under Menon. Although you often led the team to charge at the front, there were no tactics to speak of, and there were many casualties every time. But I'm afraid the mercenaries who died with you back then would never have thought that you would become an important minister of a powerful kingdom and a famous general praised by the people a few decades later." Matones' harsh words touched Amyntas' heartstrings. He did not refute, but fell silent for a moment with a pained expression. Then he said in a deep voice, "We came to Persia this time not only to take revenge on the king of Persia and wash away the humiliation of the past, but more importantly to find the bones of our comrades and bring them home." As soon as these words came out, everyone fell silent, and the atmosphere became a little heavy. Henipolis, who had been listening and collecting information for his future biography, could not help but ask in a low voice, "My lords, you have said so much just now, can you briefly talk about His Majesty at that time? He should have been a young recruit at that time, right?" Alexis, Felicius, Tormid, and the others began to talk to each other as if they did not hear Henipolis' words. Even Amyntas and Epitenes, who usually spoke without restraint, were afraid of being pestered by the annoying Henipolis at this moment, so they simply closed their eyes and pretended to be asleep. Matones, who was in the same squad as the Devers back then and was very familiar with him, even pulled Georges away from the crowd with the excuse of urging the soldiers to speed up the march. It was not because too much time had passed and they could not remember how the king of the Devers behaved back then. On the contrary, the two of them clearly remembered that when the mercenaries arrived at the bank of the Euphrates River, the young Devers were shocked by the abnormally wide river. When he stepped on the pontoon bridge, his legs actually turned to jelly, and it was almost Matones who supported him the whole way to the other side of the river. If they truthfully told the truth about these embarrassing incidents of the Devers back then, how big of an impact would it have on the people of the kingdom today? Moreover, today, 30 years later, they revisited the old place and looked back at the past, feeling even more emotional. Compared to their companions who died in battle here, they were so lucky. Not only did they escape from the encirclement and pursuit of the Persia army, but they were also able to kill their way back while they were still alive, trampling the once invincible enemy under their feet, washing away the shame. All of this was because of the person standing in front of them. It was under his leadership that the impossible became possible, creating an unprecedented miracle. At this moment, their hearts were filled with gratitude and respect for the Devers. After some time, the Devers turned around and said in high spirits, "Brothers, it's time to cross the river." The men replied in unison, "Yes, Your Majesty." When the Devers crossed the Euphrates River, they found that the situation was just as the scouts had said. The originally golden fields had been burned black, and there were villages in ruins everywhere. The largest of the ruins was the city of Tabasakus. Not only were the residences in the city burned down, but even the city walls were completely destroyed. This made the soldiers of the legion, who originally wanted to save themselves the hard work of building a camp, furious. All of them scolded the Persia people for being cowards. Although the surrounding environment had become a little harsh, the Devers still ordered the whole army to build a camp near the city of Tabasakus. The reason was simple: the Dionysian army must firmly control the pontoon bridge over the Euphrates River to ensure the smooth transportation route. When the army began to build the camp, the soldiers found a problem. The area was a continuous plain covered with withered yellow grass. Clusters of bushes and reeds could be seen from time to time, but not a single tree could be seen. Unable to make wooden fences, the soldiers had to dig more soil to make earthen walls. Of course, there were also things that pleased the soldiers. For example, the terrain here was unusually open, and the camps of the legions could be completely spread out. Unlike in Canaan and Syria, where the narrow terrain forced them to huddle together, there was little room to maneuver, let alone in Phoenicia. Another thing that excited the soldiers was that there were many animals living on the plains north of the city of Tabasakus. Wild donkeys, antelopes, bustards, and even ostriches, they foraged in groups on the wide plains. Even when they saw strangers from afar, they did not panic and ran away, because their running limbs or wings were good enough for them to evade human pursuit. While the Dionysian army was building the camp, they sent out the Numidian Light Cavalry Regiment, which was best at hunting on the plains. Thousands of Numidian light cavalry used tactics to surround wild donkeys and antelopes, shooting the bustards and ostriches with bows and arrows during the chase. In just 2 days, they provided a lot of fresh meat for the soldiers. In addition, the chefs in the supply camp also used fishing nets to catch a lot of big sturgeon in the Euphrates River. Donkey mutton was nourishing, the bustards fresh and tender, the sturgeon delicious, only ostrich meat was relatively coarse. Since the Dionysian army left Egypt and fought all the way, the original reserve of dried meat had long been used up, especially after entering the inland. Their daily food was drinking hot water and eating bread. The soldiers did not expect to eat such delicious food in the ruins of the city of Tabasakus. Not only did they feel tired, but they also had the energy to work. 2 days later, the Numidian light cavalry, who had killed all the animals near the camp, had to move eastward in search of new prey. One of the cavalry, while chasing wild donkeys, even entered the territory of Nisophonia. Then they were shocked to see an endless thick fog of dust rolling toward them, and the whole sky was dimmed. The Persia army had arrived. Before they could run back to the camp in panic, the scouts had already sent the news back to the king's tent. On one hand, the Devers ordered the legions to be on alert. On the other hand, they asked the scouts to pay close attention to the movements of the Persia army and report back at any time. In the afternoon, the Devers received news again. The Persia army stopped advancing 20 miles away from the Dionia camp and began to set up camp to rest. At the same time, they sent a team of less than 10 messengers to meet the king of Dionia. Tarabasus came to the Dionia camp under the escort of the Dionia cavalry. He stopped and looked into the distance. The Dionia camp in front of him was very simple, with only a long ditch and a soil wall more than a meter high. It was completely incomparable to the camp in Syria, but to be able to build the basic defense of the camp in just 2 days, the people of Dionia were really good at building fortifications. Tarabasus was secretly glad that his army arrived in time. At the same time, he thought about how his army should attack this simple camp if the Dionysian army still held their ground. He thought as he walked and soon came to the gate of the camp. It was said to be the camp gate, but it was actually just a gap in the earth fence. 4 heavily armed palace guards and a clerk, Henipolis, stood at the gap. "Welcome, messenger of Persia." Henipolis said welcome, but there was not a trace of enthusiasm on his face. Instead, he looked cold. Tarabasus showed a blank look, and Henipolis immediately realized that the other party did not understand Greek. The palace clerk, who was proficient in many languages, immediately repeated it in Persia. Only then did Tarabasus understand. He raised his head and replied, "I'm here to meet your king on the king's orders. His Majesty knows your purpose and agreed to meet you. Come with me." Henipolis directly interrupted him, waved his hand and gestured for him to follow, then turned around and walked back. Tarabasus' face twitched a few times. He suppressed the displeasure in his heart and quickly followed Henipolis into the camp. He immediately gathered his thoughts and began to carefully observe his surroundings. As far as he could see, the camp was a little messy. Not only were the tents built crookedly, but they were also not neatly arranged, causing the paths between the tents to be crooked. Many soldiers in unlined clothes wandered between the tents. Some were even shirtless, lying on their backs by the side of the path to bask in the sun. Even when they saw Tarabasis and Henipolis, they did not move. They only moved away reluctantly under Henipolis' scolding. Tarabasis could clearly hear their grumbling. "I've been building the camp for the past few days. I'm exhausted. It's not easy for me to lie down and rest for a while, but they still come to disturb me. How annoying. Isn't he just a lowly official writing documents for His Majesty? How dare he yell at me? If he annoys me, I'll slap him to the ground. If it's not marching, then it's building the camp. There's no end to it. We've already obtained enough wealth. Why do we still need to advance east? We might as well retreat." Tarabasis could understand Greek, but he pretended not to understand. He wanted to use it to find out more about the Dionia camp. He saw the Dionia official's face becoming more and more unpleasant, but he had to force himself to endure it. In the end, he simply stopped ordering the idle soldiers to make way for them. This also slowed down their progress. Tarabasis remained silent, but his face deliberately put on an impatient expression. After much difficulty, they finally passed through a camp. There was a commotion in front of them. Dozens of soldiers gathered together. First, they were cursing, and then they started to fight. Not long after, a heavily armed patrol team arrived and waved their sticks to disperse them. "What happened?" Tarabasis asked curiously. Henipolis hid the embarrassment on his face and said perfunctorily, "Nothing, nothing. A group of energetic soldiers had a wrestling match in private, and it turned out to be too much." Tarabasis did not ask further, but in fact, he had heard it very clearly. The two groups of soldiers fought over the prey they had caught. Finally, they arrived at the Dionysian army's main tent. Tarabasis heard quarreling coming from inside the tent. He listened carefully. It seemed like they were arguing over whether to continue marching east. "Your Majesty, the envoy from Persia has arrived," Henipolis shouted, and the tent quickly regained its silence. A deep and powerful voice came from inside. "Bring him in." When Tarabasis entered the tent, he saw 20 to 30 Dionia generals in armor and bright helmets. They turned their heads to look at the tent, and in the middle of the tent sat an old man in the same armor, but with a crown on his head. His expression was solemn and dignified. Tarabasis took 2 steps forward, bowed slightly, and said with his head held high, "The Lord of Persia, Mesopotamia, Armenia, Asia Minor, Egypt, Arabia, India." Persia, Mesopotamia, Armenia, Asia Minor, Egypt, Arabia, India. "The King of Kings, the son of Ahura Mazda, the great King Artaxerxes has sent me to bring you, the noble King of Dionia, a letter in his own handwriting, and looks forward to your reply." When Tarabasis finished, Henipolis immediately translated it in Greek. The Devers laughed. "What you said just now is wrong. Your king is deceiving himself. He should know that he is no longer the master of Egypt, and now Canaan, Phoenicia, Syria, and most of Asia Minor no longer belong to Persia." After listening to Henipolis's translation, Tarabasis responded calmly, "The war has just begun, and it is still uncertain who will win or lose. Perhaps in the end, King Artaxerxes will still become the master of Dionia." After listening to the translation, the Devers' expression changed slightly. Before he could speak, a general suddenly stood up and shouted angrily, "Damn Persia, how dare you come here and talk nonsense? Aren't you afraid that I will cut off your head and kick it like a ball?" The Devers waved his hand. "Sit down, Martones. It is a tradition not to hurt envoys when 2 armies fight. Don't let the Persia laugh at us Dionia for not understanding etiquette." Martones did not listen to him and continued to glare at Tarabasis. "Sit down." The Devers' expression was a little ugly. After shouting a few times, Martones finally sat down resentfully. Tarabasis saw the scene unfold before his eyes. After a moment, the Devers calmed down and said, "Yes, the war has just begun, and the outcome is not yet decided. Perhaps in the end, the whole of Persia will belong to Dionia. Where is the letter that Artaxerxes wrote to me?" Tarabasis immediately took out the letter from his pocket. The Devers looked around and then smiled disdainfully. letter, I won't read it. Why don't you read it out loud so that we can all hear what the king of Persia, who has always been defeated, would say in the face of our powerful elite army? The generals burst into laughter. Tarabasis listened to the translation and did not retort. The fierce gaze of the Daionia general still made his heart palpitate. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, he opened the letter as if he did not hear anything and read it aloud with a serious expression. From the Lord of the Eastern Mediterranean, the King of Kings, to the King of Daionia in the Western Mediterranean. A few decades ago, Daionia was just a small state, but they were brave and aggressive. They had never stopped invading other countries, relying on plundering and annexation to strengthen themselves, threatening and seducing other states to control them, causing the surrounding city-states to feel threatened. All along, Persia has been responsible for maintaining order in the Mediterranean, and has long wanted to teach Daionia a lesson and return peace to the Mediterranean. But I did not expect Daionia to brazenly invade Persia, occupy our territory, and kill our people. Our people are terrified, and the gods are furious. Today, I will lead a 1,000,000-strong army of vengeance to the east of the territory of Tabasakus and fight with Daionia to settle the grudge between the two countries. Do you dare to come? Tarabasis emphasized the last sentence and enunciated it word by word. Even though Henoboris translated in a gentle tone, the Devers still frowned after hearing it. He snorted heavily and said angrily, "Go back and tell Artaxerxes that I have accepted his letter of challenge, Your Majesty." Alexis interrupted him anxiously. "You cannot agree to it. The reason why the Persia dared to issue a letter of challenge is because they are already prepared. We cannot agree to it rashly. We must consider it carefully to avoid falling into their trap." "Yes, Your Majesty." Felicius also persuaded. Even though the letter says that they have an army of 1,000,000 is definitely an exaggeration, the number of Persia's army is far greater than ours. We cannot rashly engage in a battle. We should first defend our camp and then look for an opportunity. Nonsense. Lazarus stood up and retorted. Even though the Persia army has a large number of people, they are timid and afraid to fight. Even though we have fewer people, we are advancing bravely. Therefore, we should take advantage of the morale of our soldiers to engage the Persia army in a battle. We cannot blindly defend. Otherwise, the pressure on our logistics will increase. Lazarus is right. We are deep in the enemy's territory. Only by advancing bravely can we obtain the final victory. Once we hesitate, the entire army will be in trouble. Matonis also expressed his opinion loudly. Not long after, the entire tent became lively. The situation seemed to be no different from what Tarabasis had heard from outside the tent. Dozens of generals were divided into two factions. They supported or opposed the battle. Both sides were arguing endlessly, and it was difficult for them to reach an agreement. Tarabasis saw with his own eyes that the king of Daionia tried to stop them several times, but it was to no avail. It was only when the guards beside him beat a drum forcefully that the crowd stopped arguing. The Devers stood up and said loudly with some embarrassment, "Stop arguing, all of you. I have already decided. People of Persia, go back and tell your king that the battle will take place in 2 days." When Tarabasis walked out of the Daionia camp, his footsteps were light and his mood relaxed. Not only did he complete the task given by the king of Persia and successfully got the king of Daionia to accept the letter of challenge, he also learned the truth about the Dionysian army. They were not as good at fighting as the rumors said. The soldiers were tired and the generals were arrogant and difficult to tame. The king of Daionia was not as strong as the rumors said. He could not even completely control and command his generals. Tarabasis felt that the weakness of the Dionysian army would greatly increase the odds of victory for the Persians, and he was pleased that the risk he had taken to the Dionysian camp was well worth it. He hurriedly mounted his warhorse, wishing that he could return to the encampment immediately and report his findings to the king of Persia. However, he did not notice the smug smile on Henoboris's face as he stood at the entrance of the camp. After the Persia envoy left the tent became lively again. "How was my performance just now? Martones, I really didn't know that you could be an actor in the Turii theater." "Haha, forget about being an actor. I only care if the Persia people will be fooled. After all, we have urgently mobilized so many people and spent so much energy to put on this show. We can't let it go to waste. I have been observing the Persia envoy just now. Every time we speak, his expression changes a little. He probably understands Greek, which means he is paying attention to the situation in our camp. So no matter how cunning the Persia people are, they can't escape from His Majesty's plan. After the generals discussed enthusiastically for a while, the Devers coughed softly, and the whole tent suddenly quieted down. Compared to the time when the Persia envoy was here, it was a world of difference. The Devers looked around and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, now let us discuss the strategy for the decisive battle with Persia." On the morning of the 3rd of November, 364 BC, year 30 of the Kingdom of Dionia, a sharp bugle suddenly sounded, and the originally quiet Dionia camp quickly became lively. "Brothers, don't sleep in, wake up quickly." Just as the captains woke up their soldiers, the chefs in the supply camp had already begun to prepare breakfast for the soldiers. When the bugle sounded, the Devers immediately woke up from his sleep. When he saw the guards entering the tent, the first thing he asked was, "How is the weather outside?" "Your Majesty, the weather is good, there is no rain, and there is no wind." "Good weather for a battle." The Devers sighed. After the Dionysian army entered the Mesopotamian plains, the 4 seasons became more distinct. The temperature in early autumn here was a little low, the air was relatively dry, and there were more sunny days than rainy days. These were all advantageous for the Dionysian army, which mainly consisted of heavy infantry. The only downside was that it was often windy. After washing up, the guards brought breakfast: a bowl of sticky oatmeal, a bowl of hot broth, a large piece of steamed sturgeon, 2 large pieces of bread with cheese. When Henoboris entered the tent, he saw the Devers staring at the plate, and immediately said, "Your Majesty, don't worry, the soldiers' breakfast is similar to yours. In order to meet your requirements, yesterday the supply camp fished on the Euphrates River for a whole day, and the light cavalry ran hundreds of miles north, only to catch some beasts. The main thing that determines the outcome of a battle is the careful preparation before the battle." The Devers picked up a piece of bread and said seriously, "I'm afraid that today's battle will be very long. The soldiers must eat enough to have enough strength to support themselves. Considering that the formation alone may last until noon, Felicius has already informed the supply camp to prepare more bread for the soldiers to bring to the battlefield, so that they can eat more before the battle." Hearing this, "Your Majesty, I am even more confident that we will win this battle, because the king of Persia will not be able to prepare such rich food for his huge army like we do." Henoboris flattered, then sat on the wooden chair beside him, hesitated for a moment, and said again, "I heard that the people here forbid the catching of this fish, saying that it is a divine creature that will anger the gods. The angrier the enemy gods are, the happier the great Hades will be," the Devers said unhurriedly. He took a big bite of the fish, chewed a few times, and spat out the fish bones. "Have you finished your breakfast?" "I've eaten long ago." Henoboris complained. "Your Majesty, I'm not like you, who can treat a big battle as normal. I was so excited that I couldn't sleep last night, and I got up early today. Look at me, there are still dark circles under my eyes." You. The Devers looked at his funny expression as he pointed at his eyes and laughed. After he finished his breakfast, he chatted with Henoboris for a while, and the captain of the palace guards came in to report, "Your Majesty, the legions have begun to line up and leave the camp." The Devers put on his armor and walked out of the tent. The guards had already brought his war horse. It was a strong Lusitanian stallion, fat and strong, with smooth, brownish-yellow fur, and unusually tall. It kept digging the soil with its front hooves and shook its neck, as if it did not want to be led, but when the Devers walked in front of it, it immediately quieted down, lowered its head, and approached the Devers, humming softly. The Devers patted its face and said with a smile, "Hey, Nicky, you're going to fight with me again." Nicky seemed to understand. It rubbed against the Devers' hand, then raised its head and neighed happily. Since coming to this world, this was the 5th war horse that the Devers had ridden, and it was very likely to be the last. The Devers patted the horse's back with some emotion, then turned over and mounted it. Under the protection of 1,000 fully armed palace guards, they left the inner camp. There were dozens of people gathered at the exit. When they saw the Devers, someone could not help but shout, "Your Majesty, we've been waiting for almost half an hour. Why are you only coming out now? The soldiers have already left the camp." Although the man lying on the carriage had spoken rudely, the Devers was not angry. he said with a smile, Amintas, your temper has not changed even in your old age. Don't worry, the battle will not start before we arrive. Your Majesty. Hieronymus, Epicthenes, Georges, Marcius, and the others immediately came forward to greet him. The Devers looked at them and asked, Brothers, are you ready to fight? 30 years ago, after the Devers became the leader of the mercenaries and completely won the trust of the mercenaries, he often said such words before the battle. At this moment, the old generals had mixed feelings when they heard it. After a moment, they shouted excitedly, Ready. The Devers waved his right hand forward. Then let's go. After meeting up with the old generals, the whole team passed through the spacious camp passage and quickly left the main camp. The Dionysian army did not gather together before setting off. Instead, each corps was led by the corps commander. After leaving their own camps, they went directly to the predetermined battlefield. More than 20 teams marched eastward almost side by side. Because they had just eaten breakfast, and in order not to waste energy, the teams moved very slowly. The soldiers chatted and joked in the team, and the officers did not stop them. They even took the initiative to start a conversation. If people who did not know the inside story saw them, they would think that they were going for an outing instead of a life-and-death battle. More than an hour later, the teams walked out of Tabasakus and the surrounding areas that had been burned by the Persia and set foot on the green and yellow plains. After walking for a while, the corps commanders ordered, Stop moving forward and rest here. Is this the place where the battle will take place? I don't see anything special. I heard that the Persia army camp is 25 miles away from our camp. I just silently counted. This place is about 11 or 12 miles away from the camp, right in the middle. Isn't this the battlefield? But why can't I see a single Persia soldier? I heard that the Persia soldiers only know how to bully their affiliated races. They're all lazy. I'm afraid they're sleeping in the camp. Ha ha ha, hey, what are you doing? The soldiers who were chatting and laughing saw their comrades resting on the grass suddenly turn around and put their ears to the ground. A moment later, they shouted, The Persia soldiers are here. With the reminder from their comrades, the soldiers were surprised to find that the dry mud under their feet was trembling slightly. After a while, the Dionysius soldiers began to hear a faint rumble coming from afar. It sounded like muffled thunder rolling over the clouds in the sky, and the sound was getting clearer and clearer. Then, a brownish-yellow cloud appeared at the intersection of the sky and the ground, drifting slowly in the direction of the Dionysian army. From a small column of smoke at the beginning, it gradually turned into a rolling dust storm that covered the sky and covered more than a dozen miles. Under the reflection of the rising sun, countless rays of light shone in the gray dust cloud, layer upon layer, like the stars in the sky. From the huge dust cloud that shrouded the wilderness, there were shouts of people, neighs of horses, footsteps, the clashing of armors and weapons, and even the roars of beasts. All sorts of sounds intertwined together, like thousands of drums beating at the same time, shaking the heavens and the earth, making one's heart palpitate. When the dust cloud moved closer, the sharp-eyed Dionysius soldiers could already see through the flying dust cloud and see what was going on inside. It was a real sea of people. Tens of millions of soldiers dressed in all kinds of clothes, holding all kinds of weapons, and speaking different languages, densely packed and boundless, like a vast sea, surging towards them. The heavy pressure even made them suffocate to the point that they couldn't breathe. Many of the Dionysius soldiers' expressions changed. At this moment, the commander of the 1st Legion, Martones, laughed loudly. The Persia army is still the same. Don't be fooled by their numbers, they're actually useless. When we helped Persia's Prince Cyrus the Younger fight for the throne, we had a battle with the Persia army in Kunarissa, a few hundred miles away. At that time, the commander of the Persia army was today's king of Persia. The number of their soldiers was about the same as today's, far more than Cyrus the Younger's army. But as soon as the battle began, the right wing, composed of our Greek heavy infantry, smashed the left wing of the Persian army in a single charge, and if Cyrus the Younger had not been so rash as to risk his life in the charge and be killed, the throne of Persia would have long since changed hands. Today, the number of our soldiers far exceeds the army of Cyrus the Younger at that time. Our army is better trained than the Greek mercenaries at that time. Our army is more complete than the Greek mercenaries at that time. Our tactics are more advanced than the Greek mercenaries at that time. We can definitely defeat this seemingly strong but actually weak Persia army. Matoni's words greatly boosted the morale of the soldiers of the First Legion. At the same time, Trotilus and the other old generals in the army were also giving similar speeches to the soldiers under their command. Seeing that the soldiers had returned to normal, the commanders gave orders one after another, gather the troops and get into formation. When the Devers arrived, the Dionysian army was also covered in dust. Your Majesty! Alexis, Martones, Lazaru, Felicius, and Tormid hurried over on horseback. The Devers looked at the army in front of them, which was still in a marching formation. After returning the greeting, they asked, "Haven't started the formation yet?" Alexis replied, "The Persia army is very large, but it is too disorganized. It will take a long time for the Persia army to take shape. So, after some discussion, we decided to let the soldiers rest first. Based on the slow speed of the Persia army, we can still make it in time to start the formation after we confirm the location of their central army." The Devers nodded slowly. Just as they were about to speak, Amyntas, who was behind them, shouted, "Since the Persia army is large and disorganized, why don't we take this opportunity to attack?" The Devers coughed heavily and said in a deep voice, "This battle will be watched by the whole world. If we attack before they get into formation, even if we win, we will be laughed at by the people of other countries. I need a glorious victory to intimidate the Persia people. Also, I need to severely injure the main force of Persia in this battle so that the Persia people won't be able to fight us in the future. If we attack too early, it will only cause the Persia people to retreat. We won't be able to achieve much." Amyntas was so embarrassed that he couldn't say anything. The Devers didn't care about Amyntas' feelings at the moment. He continued, "Come, let's go to the front and take a look." After that, he urged his horse forward. The palace guards immediately came forward and surrounded him in the center. Alexis, Felicius, Matones, Lazaru, and Tormid couldn't stop him in time and could only follow. Amyntas, Hieronymus, and the others could only stay where they were because they didn't have any military duties to attend to. The Devers rode through the gaps between the armies and came to the front of the army. Looking to the east, the Persia army stopped a mile away. Although there was still dust flying everywhere, the flat and vast plains were unobstructed. They could already see the situation inside more clearly. They could even hear the shouts of the Persia generals. The Persia army stretched for more than 10 miles from north to south. In order to have a more comprehensive understanding of the Persia army's formation, the Devers rode from the south to the north at the front of the Dionysian army, observing the enemy's situation as they went. However, when the Dionysian soldiers saw their beloved king passing by, they were all extremely excited and shouted, "Victory to your Majesty! Victory to your Majesty!" The news quickly spread throughout the army, and the sound of cheering increased even more. It was like the rumbling of winter thunder, completely overshadowing the noise coming from the opposite side. This caused the Devers to have no choice but to turn an investigation of the enemy's situation into a pre-battle inspection. This also aroused the curiosity of the Persia people. "What's happening?" King Artaxerxes of Persia, who was at the back of the army, heard the thunderous roar and couldn't help but ask the commander of the undead army in front of him. Soon, the scouts reported back, "Your Majesty, the king of Dionia is inspecting the army." "The outcome of a battle is not decided by the loudness of the voices," Artaxerxes said in a strange tone. Artaxerxes said sarcastically. In fact, he knew very well that if he was the one inspecting the Persian army, it would be very difficult for him to receive such continuous cheers. Not only because of the subsidiary armies, but also because of his lack of prestige among the Persian soldiers. It was precisely because of this jealousy that he impatiently said to Tribasus, who was standing beside him, "Urge all the troops to get into formation as soon as possible. The sooner the enemy is defeated, the sooner the noise is over." The Persia army stretched for more than 10 miles from north to south. Although the Dionysian army didn't spread out, the legions were almost evenly distributed in the area. In order to save horsepower, the Devers had to smile and wave at the soldiers while controlling the horses to move slowly. After more than half an hour, he began to return from the north to the south. "Your Majesty, look. That should be Artaxerxes." Alexis suddenly pointed to the east and shouted. In the opposite Persia army, there was a luxurious carriage pulled by 4 pure white horses. There was a person standing on the carriage. He was wearing luxurious clothing, reflecting the sunlight, and looked very dazzling. the Devers reined in the war horse. He was a little curious about the appearance of the so-called King of Kings. Artaxerxes was also staring at the King of Dionia, who was wearing a crown in front of him. The two sides were separated by more than a mile. After looking at each other for a while, the Devers shifted his gaze to the front of the King of Persia. Dense formation, thick round shields, helmet that completely covered the face. It was the Greek heavy infantry. The Devers was not too surprised. From Leotychides' report on the Asia Minor battle, he knew that there were a lot of Greek mercenaries in the Persia army. He also carefully observed the spears in front of the King of Persia's carriage. It was like a dense forest. It could be seen that the infantry column was quite thick, and behind those erected spears, there were even longer spears. Through the gaps between the swaying Greek heavy infantry, he saw long-bearded soldiers wearing long robes, covered with golden armor, and holding spears and shields. Compared to the information he knew, he understood Persia's undead army. He immediately pointed to the King of Persia's carriage and said with certainty, "The center of the Persia army is over there." In fact, there was no need for the Devers to say more. Alexis had already made the same judgment. So when the Devers returned to the back of the army, the entire Dionysian army began to arrange their soldiers. The staff officer of the First Legion rushed to the front of the First Legion and said to the flag-bearer, "Lead the troops and follow me to the position of the First Legion." The flag-bearer heard this and waved the flag. The soldiers of the First Legion who were resting immediately stood up and quickly lined up. Under the leadership of the staff officer, the 6,000 heavy infantry soldiers of the First Legion bypassed a few other troops and came to the position facing the King of Persia's carriage. Spread out into formation. As soon as the staff officer at the front shouted, the 6 heavy infantry platoons commanded their respective platoons to spread out in a formation of 3 horizontally and 2 vertically. They also widened the distance between each platoon. Then, the platoon leaders commanded their soldiers to quickly line up into a square formation. Then, the platoon leaders split the formation into 4 smaller square formations and arranged them in a crisscross formation. In less than 10 minutes, the soldiers of the First Legion had completed their formation. The reason why Martones did not personally command them was because in this battle, he was not only the commander of the First Legion, but also the commander of the middle path by the Devers. He still had to give orders to the other legions. With the First Legion as the center of the formation, the rest of the legions began to move. Unlike the Persia, the generals and officers did not command the soldiers by shouting. Instead, they used flag signals to guide the soldiers. The soldiers also strictly obeyed the order and did not casually joke around during the formation process. In the stirring dust, there was only the hua-hua-hua sound of footsteps and the clashing of armors and weapons. There was almost no noise of people. More than half an hour later, almost all the Dionia troops had completed their formation. This side was soon quiet again, but the Persia side was still noisy. 2 days ago, after listening to Tarabassus's description of the situation in the Dionia camp, Artaxerxes' confidence in winning the battle increased. Now that he was on top of the carriage, he could clearly see the situation on the opposite side. The fast and efficient formation of the Dionysian army was too obvious compared to the chaotic procrastination of his own side, which made him feel a little uneasy. As far as his eyes could see, there was nothing but darkness. The sense of uniformity of the formation was so oppressive that he could not help but shout, "Tarabassus, urge all troops to hurry up. Hurry up." "Yes, Your Majesty." After the Dionysian army finished their formation, the sun had almost risen to the middle of the sky. The soldiers received orders from their officers one after another, "Hurry up and replenish your food and drink." Just as the soldiers of the 1st Division of the 2nd Brigade of the 1st Legion were chewing on the bread they carried and passing water bags to each other, someone exclaimed, "Captain, look. The Persia really have elephants." Artaxerxes, who was standing at the back of the division and serving the soldiers, immediately walked to the front of the formation and looked forward. He saw dozens of elephants in cloaks and with sharp swords tied to their tusks, slowly walking to the front of the Persia formation under the command of the elephant handlers. The elephants were huge and particularly eye-catching compared to the troops around them. Their appearance immediately caused a commotion among the soldiers of the First Legion and the surrounding legions. Artaxerxes took a deep breath, then turned around and shouted to the soldiers who were talking among themselves, Commander Matonis has already told us before that the Persia army may have war elephants. What's there to be surprised about? Captain, we're just curious. The Persia actually sent such docile animals to the battlefield, a soldier responded. No matter how docile an animal is, once it goes crazy, it can be very scary. Don't take it lightly. Arsenis reminded him, and then laughed, but the Persia don't know how many times we have seen elephants in the Turiai Zoo. They think they can scare us with it. When the time comes, we will make the Persia suffer from the abuse of elephants. Captain, don't worry. We are not afraid of elephants. We just think that elephants are so cute. It would be a pity if they all died in this battle, another soldier said half jokingly and half seriously. Another soldier immediately replied, I don't feel that it's a pity. It's not our fault that these elephants died in battle. On the contrary, it would be great if we could taste the meat of the elephant after the war. Crips, you glutton. You've eaten so much good food these past few days, and you're still not satisfied? Do you think you can become as strong as an elephant after eating elephant meat? Arsens laughed. Captain, he just feels that the thing down there is too small, so he wants to make it bigger, a soldier joked loudly. The soldiers roared with laughter. More than an hour later, the Persia army finally got into formation. The Persia archers in the middle were in a loose formation, followed by Indian war elephants and sickle chariots. The war elephants were in the middle, and the chariots were on both sides. Behind them were 3,000 Persia cavalry in armor. Behind the cavalry were 20,000 Greek heavy infantry and 10,000 undead soldiers. Artaxerxes was in the rear. Behind him were troops from Mesopotamia and Persia along the Gulf of Persia. At the front of the right wing were Persia archers and a mixed group of archers from Armenia, Parthia, and Media. Behind them were 100 chariots from Media and Babylon. Behind the chariots were infantry from Dugia, Ameria, and Persia. Behind them were troops from tribes around the Caspian Sea, such as the Sulcalians and the Tapurians. At the far right of the right wing were more than 10,000 cavalry from Ameria, Parthia, and Media. Foremost on the left flank was a mixed force of Persian, Arab, Bactrian, and Arahosian archers, followed by the infantry of Persians, Carians, and Eastern Axians and Western Tarkans, east of Susa, and then by the far eastern races, led by Arahosian and Bactrian troops. At the far left of the left wing were more than 10,000 cavalry led by Persia, Scythia, and Bactria. The 500 camel cavalry of Arabia were in the front. From the formation of the Persia, it could be seen that the Persia formation had a thick depth, and the middle was the strongest. The reason why the Persia made such an arrangement was that they took into account the fact that the Dionysian army had many heavy infantry and strong close combat abilities. Therefore, they increased the depth of their formation to increase their close combat ability. Whether it was for safety reasons or to dispel Artaxerxes' fear, Artaxerxes had been traumatized by Cyrus's javelin attack in the battle with Cyrus the Young. The strength of the middle had to be strengthened. Therefore, Lalabasus took the opportunity to propose a suggestion: amass a large number of soldiers in the middle, use war elephants and chariots to tear open the enemy's defense line, then use armored cavalry to charge and completely disrupt the enemy's heavy infantry. The Greek heavy infantry and undead army would then charge and completely crush the enemy, thus winning the battle. In the end, Artaxerxes accepted his suggestion. The formation adopted by the Dionysian army was: the middle consisted of the 1st Legion, Legio IV, 7th Legion, 12th Legion, and 15th Legion in a chessboard formation. When combined, the thickness was 10 columns, with 5 light infantry brigades at the back. The commander of the entire middle was Matonis. The left wing consisted of the 2nd Legion, 5th Legion, 8th Legion, 14th Legion, and 16th Legion in a chessboard formation. When combined, the thickness was 10 columns, with no other troops at the back. The leftmost part of the left wing consisted of the 1st Cavalry Legion, 3rd Cavalry Legion, Gallic Cavalry Legion, and 2,000 Numidian light cavalry. At the back were 9 light armored brigades. Behind them were 6 light infantry brigades and 2,000 Beliali stonecutters. The right wing consisted of Legio III, Legio VI, 11th Legion, 13th Legion, and 17th Legion in a chessboard formation. When combined, the thickness was 10 columns, with no other troops at the back. The rightmost part of the right wing consisted of the 2nd Cavalry Legion, 4th Cavalry Legion, Iberian Cavalry Legion, and 2,000 Numidian light cavalry. At the back were 9 light armored brigades. Behind them were 6 light infantry brigades and 2,000 Beliali stonecutters. The command center where the King of Devers was located at the back of the middle. In addition to the palace guards, there were also the 18th Legion, 19th Legion, and 21st Legion on the left and right as reserves. From the formation of the Dionysian army, it could be seen that Dionia had gathered a large number of troops at both ends of the flanks. Obviously, they wanted to defeat the Persia cavalry first, and then outflank them from both flanks. The Persia cavalry was obviously stronger than the Dionia cavalry, but the Devers actually wanted to attack the enemy's strongest point. It could be said that they knew there was a tiger in the mountain, but they still chose to go to the tiger's mountain. Although the Persia army was twice the size of the Dionysian army, due to the caution of the Persia king, Artaxerxes, the depth of the formation was significantly increased. On the other hand, due to the confidence of the King of Devers, the Dionysian army's infantry formation was only 10 columns thick. Therefore, the length of the formation of the two sides was almost the same, 15 miles long. The Persia army had many different types of troops. Not only did they wear different clothes and weapons, but even the soldiers themselves were very different. Therefore, even though the entire formation was mostly a dense formation, and they stood on a flat battlefield, the experienced Dionia cavalry could still roughly determine the distribution of troops at the front of the Persia formation through careful observation. On the other hand, the Dionysian army was almost entirely made up of black helmets and black armor. The types of troops were relatively simple, and the Devers deliberately did not let the enemy see the actual situation of the formation. Therefore, after the heavy infantry and cavalry at the front of the formation were completed and could block the enemy's line of sight, they began to arrange the troops at the back. At the same time, the Devers specially ordered that the soldiers at the back of the formation were not to raise their weapons before the battle began. At this moment, according to the reports of the cavalry scouts, Felicius and his staff had already drawn a sketch of the distribution of troops at the front of the entire Persia formation. The Devers took the wooden board that Felicius handed over. After carefully reading the sketch on it, he was slightly surprised. Hey, the Persia have 100 more chariots. This is a little different from the number that Izam told us. Maybe they just arrived recently, Felicius explained. The Devers thought for a moment and quickly made a decision. Then, let the light infantry on the right send 2,000 men to deal with these chariots. Yes, Your Majesty. Felicius immediately went to pass on the order. Your Majesty, it's already past noon. Let's eat something first, Henoporus reminded him from the side. I'm not hungry yet. Henoporus had already asked this a few times, so the Devers waved his hand impatiently. After the messengers set off, he kept looking to the left with concern, even though he could not see the movements of the troops a few miles away from where he was. After a while, he suddenly realized something and asked, Have Hieronymus and Amyntas eaten? Before Henoporus could answer, Hieronymus's voice came from behind, Your Majesty, we're old and don't participate in the battle. It doesn't matter if we eat or not, yes, Your Majesty, we don't have the leisure to eat now. We just have to wait for the battle to begin. Amyntas interrupted impatiently. There's no rush, the Devers said calmly, the longer we delay, the more disadvantageous it will be for the Persia. As he spoke, Izam galloped from the left and shouted, Your Majesty, I've found the position of the Zoquant warriors in the Persia formation. The Devers perked up and immediately asked, That's great. Where are they? Felicius took the wooden board and handed it over. Izam panted heavily as he took the board and looked at the Persia's formation carefully. He then pointed at the center of the right flank and said excitedly, They're here. Remy followed the signal I agreed on before I left and had the Persia's civilians wave their bronze shields up and down in a rhythmic pattern in front of the sun. This way, they'll stand out from the rest of the Persia's army. Even from here, I can see them clearly. Back then, when we conquered Asplustum, our mountain reconnaissance brigade used a similar method. Very good. You've done a great job. The Devers interrupted him and asked, Which army are we facing? The 11th Legion's 3rd and 4th Legion, Izam immediately replied. Your Majesty, we can send the 18th Legion over as backup. When Izam's army retreats, we can make full use of this opportunity to attack Persia's formation. Felicius also suggested excitedly. 1 legion is not enough. The Devers shook his head and said firmly, "Send the 19th Legion over as well. This will be the breakthrough point for our infantry." Just as the two legions of Dionia were quietly mobilizing at the back of the formation, Meldonios had already ridden to the king of Persia's carriage and said anxiously, "Your Majesty, all the troops are already in formation. Why haven't you given the order to attack yet?" Artaxerxes said hesitantly. "Should we wait for Dionia to attack first? Dionia has fewer soldiers. They won't attack us first." Meldonios suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart and turned to look at Tribasus, who was not far away. He vented his anger on him. "Aren't you known as the most resourceful minister in the kingdom? How did you manage to advise the king on military affairs?" Since the attack plan had been formulated before the battle, it was time to assist the king in executing it. It's been almost half an hour since the formation has been completed, and the soldiers are still standing there like idiots. Do you know that when I rushed here from the left flank, I saw that many of the subsidiary troops were already a little unstable, and even the formation of the East Wuxian people was starting to become chaotic. Tarabasus remained silent and did not refute. He had urged the king of Persia several times before, but the king of Persia seemed to have some concerns and had not made a decision. That was why he kept delaying. Artaxerxes' expression changed. Of course, he could tell that Meldonios was scolding him indirectly, but he could not rebuke him on the spot. On the one hand, they were facing a great enemy, which would affect their morale, and on the other hand, he felt guilty. It was true that he had discussed repeatedly with several of his ministers before the battle and came up with tactics that focused on offense. Still, when he saw the Dionysian army's simple and swift formation, the soldiers in their formation standing silently and as steady as a mountain, he suddenly felt a strong sense of unease in his heart when compared to his own disorganized and noisy army. Memories of his past defeats flashed in his mind, and he could not help but worry about his gains and losses. But when he heard what Meldonios said next, he was taken aback. Tarabasus, who was good at reading people's expressions, immediately said, "Your Majesty, those subsidiary troops are not our well-trained Persia army. Although they have undergone strict training, it is difficult for them to maintain their formation for a long time. We must attack as soon as possible." Artaxerxes looked at Tarabasus, and then at Meldonios, "Then give the order to attack?" Meldonios said anxiously, "Your Majesty, don't hesitate, give the order quickly." Artaxerxes gripped the handrail of the carriage tightly. He glanced at the majestic undead army in front of him, the impregnable Greek mercenaries, the huge war elephants, the terrifying war chariots, the well-trained archers. Finally, he looked at the silent Dionysian army in front of him. After a moment of silence, he took a deep breath and said loudly, "Prepare to attack." Meldonios was overjoyed. He turned his horse and galloped back. Tarabasus immediately shouted, "Prepare to attack! Prepare to attack!" Woo, woo. As the bugle of the Persia army sounded, Tarabasus continued to give the order on behalf of the king of Persia, "Archers, attack!" A flag embroidered with a bow and arrow was raised high in front of Artaxerxes' carriage. However, only the archers in the middle of the army could see the flag waving. The whole army was more than 10 miles long. Not to mention seeing the flag, even the soldiers on both sides might not be able to hear the bugle. However, the Persia army had their own ways. Two teams of Persia messengers in gorgeous military uniforms galloped out from both sides of the carriage. They passed through the gaps between the troops and rushed to the front. Then, they ran wildly along the two sides of the army while shouting, "Archers, attack! Archers, attack!" The archers in the middle began to move. The archers on the left began to move. The archers on the right began to move. At the forefront of the Persia army, the archers lined up in a loose formation of more than 10 miles long, like a long snake that had just woken up from hibernation, began to slowly advance toward the Dionia army. As soon as he heard the bugle from the opposite side, Artaxerxes, like the other team officers, immediately became alert. He shouted to the soldiers under his command, "Attention, brothers, the Persia army is about to attack." At the same time, he saw that some of the soldiers in the team were too excited and eager to fight, so he immediately reminded them, "Everyone must strictly follow the pre-war arrangement and prepare for defense. If anyone dares to violate the military order, they will be severely punished." The soldiers' hearts skipped a beat, and their expressions became solemn. "Captain, the archers of Persia are coming." The soldiers in the first row shouted. "Prepare for defense." Artaxerxes' heart tightened, and he looked forward. The archers of Persia were advancing very slowly, because the Persia generals who led the army knew the details of the battle in Asia Minor. They knew that the Dionysian army also had a large number of strong light infantry, so they were carefully guarding against the appearance of the enemy. However, when they were less than 250 meters away from the Dionysian army, the enemy's light infantry still did not appear in front of the formation. Although the generals were puzzled, they did not stop the soldiers from advancing. When they were about 100 meters away from the Dionysian army, the archers consciously stopped moving forward. "Fire!" Amidst the shouts of the generals, the archers nocked their arrows and drew their bows. They raised their bows at a high angle. Whoosh! 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 The sound of bowstrings, which was originally very light, was gathered by thousands of arrows, and could be heard clearly by the Dionysian soldiers who were 100 meters away. "Turtle shell formation!" Artaxerxes shouted. The soldiers who were originally in a dense formation quickly shrank inward, and at the same time, they placed the long shields in their hands on the outside and above the small square formation. In the blink of an eye, it was as if the 50-man team was covered with a layer of black iron, and they were tightly protected. Artaxerxes, who was in the middle of the square formation, looked up through the small gap between the long shields and saw arrows pouring down from the sky like torrential rain. Even with the protection of the thick long shields, he could not help but feel nervous. Bang! Bang! Clang! 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 The arrows continued to hit different parts of the long shields, making different sounds, as if they were playing a melody of death. The Dionysian soldiers in the turtle shell formation looked nervous, but when the melody disappeared, no one was injured. Before they could catch their breath, the melody sounded again. After repeating it 3 or 4 times, there was finally a long interval. This was because the commanders of the mixed Persian archers discovered that the Dionysian army's front line had adopted such a strange formation, causing their projectiles to barely cause any damage. So, they urged their soldiers to move forward and increase the penetrating power of their arrows by getting closer to the Dionysian army. When they were only 50 meters away, the Persia archers did not dare to move forward anymore, because they had heard that the Dionysian heavy infantry could throw javelins, and they were too close to the enemy. When they shot their arrows, the Dionysian soldiers on the opposite side would suddenly charge, and it would be difficult for them to escape. It was precisely because of this danger that not all archers were willing to continue to approach the Dionysian army. Some archers of other races were afraid to move forward even though the Persia generals repeatedly urged them to do so. The Persian archers at the front used straight arrows, while the soldiers at the back used projectile arrows. Furthermore, the arrows were more concentrated on the tortoiseshell formations, rather than a wide area of effect attack. As a result, the efficiency was not high, as Dionysia's chessboard formation made the entire formation more scattered, causing many projectile arrows to land on empty ground. More intensive sounds rang out outside the turtle shell formation formed by Arsene's unit, like a rainstorm beating on lotus leaves. Every long shield was full of arrows like a hedgehog, and the soldiers groaned in pain from time to time. It was the sharp tips of the arrows that pierced through the shield and touched the bare arms or thighs of the Dionysian soldiers. Occasionally, arrows passed through the gaps of the shield formation, but because they were blocked by the thick helmets and breastplates, they did not cause much damage. The Dionysian soldiers gritted their teeth and held on. Of course, they were almost shoulder to shoulder, and even if they were injured, they could not dodge or retreat. As the captain of the unit, Arsenes not only had to spy on the enemy's movements from time to time, but also listen to the frequency of the arrows hitting the long shields. Suddenly, he said in a low voice, "Brothers, hold on a little longer, the arrows of the Persia should be running out." As soon as his voice trailed off, the sounds outside the formation began to become sparse and soon disappeared. The Persia archers still had 3 or 4 arrows left in their quiver, but they chose to retreat at this time. On the one hand, it was because the continuous pulling of the bow had caused their arms to become numb, and they needed to rest. On the other hand, they also needed to provide support for the infantry in the next close combat. This was the traditional tactic of the Persia, and of course, they could not use up all their arrows at this time. The Persia archers retreated a long distance before Arsenes gave the order to retreat. The soldiers withdrew their shields and stood up to take a look. They were stunned, the flat ground around them was full of arrows, and the same was true for the shields, which caused the weight of the shields to suddenly increase. In order not to affect the use of the shields, the soldiers immediately pulled out their short swords and cut off the shafts of the shields. "Your Majesty, the Persia archers have retreated. Our casualties are not heavy." After listening to the instant news from the messengers, Felicius reported to the king with a joyful expression. The Devers nodded calmly. 30 years ago, we used this method to successfully defend against the long-range attacks of the Persia archers. Now, the defensive ability of our soldiers is better than we were back then. The Persia still use the same old method to deal with us. It is impossible for them to gain any advantage. Amyntas said disdainfully. At the military conference before the war, it was because of the suggestion of the old generals that the Devers decided not to use the light infantry first, but to let the heavy infantry fight against the Persia archers who had the advantage in long-range attacks to achieve the goal of wearing down the enemy. Now it seemed that the plan had worked. At this time, the Devers looked at the Persia archers opposite them who retreated like the tide and said calmly, "The appetizer has been eaten. Next, it is time for the main course." The distance of a mile made it impossible for the king of Persia and Tarabasis to see the casualties of the enemy. But from the words of the retreating generals, Tarabasis learned that the result of the battle was not ideal. He was shocked. It was his suggestion to send the Persia archers to fight first. Based on his detailed understanding of the battle in Asia Minor, and by referring to some of the past battles of Ionia, he discovered that the Dionysian army was different from the Greek army. The Dionysian army's light infantry was not weak, and they liked to take the lead in battle to disrupt the enemy's formation. Therefore, he made such a suggestion, hoping to use his powerful archers to cripple the enemy's light infantry. This way, he could gain more advantages, and at the same time, destroy the enemy's morale. However, he did not expect that the enemy's light infantry did not participate in the battle, and the long-range attacks against the heavy infantry of Dionia did not achieve much results. When Tarabasis approached Artaxerxes, there was no longer any worry on his face. Instead, there was joy on his face. "Your Majesty, the attack of the archers has caused the heavy infantry of Dionia to suffer heavy casualties. We should take advantage of this victory and attack. We cannot let the Dionysian army rest." Artaxerxes was overjoyed and said without hesitation, "Then let's continue the attack." "Yes, Your Majesty." Tarabasis turned around and ordered, "Chariots and war elephants, attack." The cavalrymen galloped out. Some of them ran to the front of the formation in the middle, while the others ran to the left. Soon, Artaxerxes heard the loud roar of the elephants coming from the front. He was invigorated. He slapped the chariots and said excitedly, "Crush all the Dionia soldiers." Under the command of the elephants' men, the 50 elephants began to move forward with their thick and sturdy limbs. Every step they took caused the ground to tremble. While they were still slowly accelerating, the war chariots with sickles on both sides were already advancing at full speed. The war horses were galloping, and the wheels were turning at high speed. They were rumbling and stirring up clouds of dust. Even though there were only 200 chariots, they gave off the imposing aura of a magnificent army. They were like giant roaring beasts as they charged ferociously at the Dionysian army. Even soldiers like Artaxerxes, who had received training on how to deal with chariots during their stay in Egypt, could not help but feel nervous at this moment. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps rang out beside Artaxerxes. It turned out that the light infantrymen at the rear of the infantry formation had quickly passed through the passageways between the phalanxes and ran to the front of the formation. In fact, after the Dionia light infantrymen learned about the position of the Persia chariots and war elephants, they had arranged their tactics in advance. So the 5,000 light infantrymen ran to the front and quickly formed a formation. The harpooneers faced the war elephants in the middle, while the archers faced the chariots on both sides. Without the need for the commander to give the order, the archers immediately drew their bows and fired arrows at the front. Even though the chariots were still 100 meters away, they chose to shoot straight instead of projecting arrows. This was because they had gone through actual combat training in Egypt and knew that projecting arrows was difficult to hit a speeding chariot. On the contrary, even if they shot straight, the chariots would take the initiative to hit the arrows as they approached. As soon as the archers shot an arrow, they did not wait to see what the result would be. They immediately pulled out their arrows and shot again because they did not have much time left. McDuckwides, a native of Crete, had won the championship in archery at the first Dionia Games last year. Dionia's Ministry of Military Affairs had extended an invitation to him. After much consideration, he finally decided to join Dionia. With the special permission of the King of Devers, he only needed to serve in the army for 3 years before he could become a full-fledged citizen. After the news was deliberately publicized by the Turii City Hall, it caused a heated discussion among the people of various alliances. The athletes were even more eager and actively trained, preparing to achieve excellent results in the second Dionia Games in order to gain the favor of the King of Dionia. However, the Dionia Games, like other Greek games, were also held once every 4 years, which was a long time. After McDuckwides immigrated to Turii, he temporarily lived in the barracks. While receiving military training, he also assisted the military trainer in training and improving the archery skills of the new recruits. The light infantry, especially the archers, relied more on their individual skills. In the traditional Greek army, the archers did not have any special tactics. Instead, they relied more on their individual skills. However, the Dionysian army was different, and they had higher requirements for the archers' tactical ability. McDuckwides had only been in the barracks for half a year, and he had just familiarized himself with the light infantry tactics when he encountered this war. The Turii barracks did not initially want to recruit him, but in order to make military contributions and become a full-fledged citizen as soon as possible, he repeatedly asked for it. Considering his amazing archery skills, the captain of the light infantry of the 1st Legion recruited him as an ordinary soldier. At this moment, McDuckwides ran to the front of the formation with his teammates. When he saw the chariots rushing through the dust and rushing toward them, the soldiers shot the arrows in their hands. Although it was the first time he had experienced such a grand scene, he was born with a big heart. Otherwise, he would not have defeated so many strong players in the first Dionia Games and won the archery competition. He did not immediately release the arrow. Instead, he quickly calmed his breath, looked at the chariots in front of him, and aimed for a while before releasing the bowstring. As the main weapon of the Persia army, the Persia knew that the scythe chariots were too big a target and vulnerable to long-range attacks. So, not only did they cover the war horse with armor, but the archers and crossbowmen on the chariots were also wearing armor. Although many of the arrows hit the war horse, they were blocked by the armor and did not cause any fatal injuries. On the contrary, under the rapid whipping of the crossbowmen, the horse whined and accelerated forward. At this moment, the arrow shot by McDuckwides penetrated the war horse's head, which was not covered by the armor. The war horse suddenly fell, and the entire chariot turned upside down due to inertia. The crossbowmen and archers on the chariot were thrown into the air, screaming as they fell toward McDuckwides. McDuckwides and his teammates hurriedly dodged. "Watch out! Chariot! Chariot!" The soldiers behind him screamed in horror, and McDuckwides turned his head in a hurry. He saw a chariot not far away, not running in a straight line, but horizontally rushing toward them. The distance was very close, and McDuckwides scrambled to avoid it. However, there were also soldiers who could not dodge in time. Unfortunately, one of their legs was grazed by a flash of white light on the axle of the chariot. They were immediately twisted into several pieces and fell to the ground, wailing. The surrounding soldiers were shocked when they saw this tragic scene. McDuckwides then discovered that the driver and archers on the chariot had been shot and fell to the ground. When he and his teammates aimed their bows and arrows at the war horse, the two frightened war horses seemed to sense danger and ran back in panic with the chariot on their back. With a loud bang, they collided head-on with one of their own chariots. While the war horse whined, McDuckwides and the others breathed a sigh of relief. Compared to their teammates who stood still and shot arrows, the javelin throwers of the light infantry did not stop after rushing out of the formation. Instead, they accelerated forward. When they were only a few dozen meters away from the slowly running war elephant, they risked being shot by the archers on the back of the war elephant and threw the javelins in their hands. The skin of the war elephant was tough and thick, and it was difficult for arrows to penetrate it. Therefore, the Persia did not put armor on it. However, the Persia never thought that the Dionia people they despised were not afraid of this behemoth, but took the initiative to fight. Dozens or even hundreds of heavy javelins concentrated on a war elephant was enough to threaten the life of the war elephant. For the Dionia light infantry, the war elephant was large and slow, so it was easier to deal with than the galloping chariot. One by one, the war elephants were shot into hedgehogs. Although these war elephants had been specially trained, their gentle nature had not changed. When they felt the danger in front of them, they turned around and ran back, completely disobeying the commands of the elephant man. Only a few war elephants went crazy because of the pain, accelerated forward, and then fell down after a round of throwing by the javelin throwers. When the light infantry rushed forward, the soldiers of the legion did not relax their vigilance. As the platoon leader, Arsenides even ran to the front and stared nervously at the situation in front of him. When he saw a chariot in front of him break through the blockade of the light infantry and rush straight to the phalanx, he hurriedly shouted, "Dodge! Dodge!" Because the Dionia formation was a loose chessboard formation, there was enough space for the soldiers to dodge and move. The galloping Persia chariot could not turn due to inertia, so it could only move forward along the path quickly made by the Dionia soldiers. The Dionia soldiers took the opportunity to attack the chariot from both sides with their javelins, killing the horses and drivers. Although Persia's scythe war chariots were terrifying weapons, the Dionysian army's well-prepared tactics prevented them from being shot down by the light infantrymen or annihilated by the legionnaires. The damage done to the Dionia army was minimal. As the war chariots and war elephants kicked up a cloud of dust, Artaxerxes and Tarabasus, who were a few hundred meters away, couldn't see the situation. Once the attack was launched, it had to be carried out according to the plan. Therefore, not long after the war chariots and war elephants moved out, the king of Persia sent out 3,000 armored cavalrymen from the middle lane, hoping that they could follow the chariots and war elephants and break through the Dionia army. Persia's undead army didn't only consist of infantrymen, but also chariots and cavalrymen. The 3,000 armored cavalrymen were part of the undead army. They were elites selected from the massive Persia cavalry and rode on the tallest and strongest war horse. The war horse was covered in armor while the cavalrymen wore full leather armor and wielded Persia's sabers. They were also equipped with double-edged axes and bows. According to the undead army's traditional tactics, the cavalry would launch the second wave of attacks after the chariots. Most of the time, they would be able to defeat the enemy before the infantrymen could even set out. This time, the undead army hoped to repeat the same trick. After the king of Persia gave the order, the cavalry marched forward in 3 horizontal lines that spanned across the entire middle lane. The reason why Tarabasus didn't adopt a dense rhombus formation was because he thought that the impact of the war chariots and war elephants would definitely cause damage to the Dionia army and the cavalry wouldn't face much resistance. Therefore, he wanted to increase the cavalry's attack range and cause more damage to the Dionia army so that the infantrymen wouldn't be able to recover. This way, the infantrymen would be able to completely destroy the middle lane of the Dionia army. However, not long after the cavalry set off, they ran into some trouble. They ran head-on into the retreating war elephants. These huge animals, which had become sensitive and easily angered due to their injuries, saw the Persian cavalry charging towards them. They thought that it was disadvantageous to them, so they angrily swung their long trunks, trampled and collided with them, disrupting the cavalry's charging formation. Then, the red-eyed war elephants charged towards the Persian infantry formation in front of them with large strides. The bearers on the backs of the elephants had no choice but to endure the pain and drive long iron nails into the war elephants' brains, causing them to suddenly fall to the ground amidst mournful cries. There were also a few war elephants that ran out of control and threw off the elephant drivers on their backs, crashing straight into the dense infantry formation and causing a commotion. Artaxerxes felt a little uneasy when he saw this. "Tarabasus, what's going on?" Tarabasus didn't dare to answer directly. Instead, he hurriedly reminded Artaxerxes, "Your Majesty, the undead army has been mobilized. It's time to launch an all-out attack." Now? This was originally a plan that had been drawn up, but Artaxerxes was a little hesitant when it came to it. Artaxerxes' hesitation did not displease Tarabasus. On the contrary, he was glad that the king of Persia's attention had been diverted. Having led his troops many times, he knew that the biggest weakness of war elephants was that they were difficult to control. In the past, there had been incidents where war elephants collided with his own army, but it had never been as many as today's battle. At this moment, he had no time to think about the reason behind it. He could only urge loudly, the chariots, war elephants, and cavalry have launched an attack on Dionia's army in the middle. We must seize this opportunity to launch an all-out attack and completely defeat the enemy. Tarabasus' words temporarily dispelled the haze that rose in Artaxerxes' heart again. He pulled himself together and nodded. Hearing the loud sound of the bugle and seeing the Persia messengers galloping past in front of him, Remy took a deep breath. He knew that the important moment that would determine the survival of his tribe had finally arrived. Suddenly, his heavy heart was mixed with a bit of relief. He had been suffering for a period of time, and now, there was finally an outcome. He looked back at the Persia commander who was constantly shouting to attack in the rear, and his face showed a trace of a contemptuous smile. At the front of the right wing of the Persia army, Maldonios, who was waiting impatiently, received the order from the king of Persia. His anger immediately turned into joy. He waved the long saber in his hand impatiently. Attack! 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 The reason why he was so excited was not only because he was not only the descendant of Gobrias, but also the descendant of Maldonios, the commander of the Persia army who commanded the Battle of Plataea. Maldonios died bravely on the battlefield, but because of his failure in the Battle of Plataea, he was criticized by the nobles of Persia, which affected the reputation of the whole family. Maldonios had decided to make the first contribution in this battle and wash away the stain of his family. The formation of the undead cavalry was very long. The little chaos caused by the retreat of a dozen war elephants was not enough to affect the advance of the whole army. However, the rain of arrows shot by thousands of Dionia light infantry caused more trouble for the Persia cavalry. Mcgusides watched with satisfaction as the Persia cavalry in the distance rolled on the ground with their horses. When he was about to pull out the second arrow, he heard the shouts of the officers. But the battlefield was too noisy, and he could not hear them clearly. He did not respond, but his teammates next to him pulled him and shouted anxiously, "Retreat! Retreat now!" Mcgusides was dragged back by his teammates. He shouted unwillingly, "There's still time, we can shoot one more arrow." "Bullshit!" his teammates scolded. "The heavy infantry still needs time to get into formation." Mcgusides was speechless. In traditional Greek battles, the light infantry was the support, and the attack and retreat were completely up to them. But in the Dionysian army, all the units needed to cooperate closely. As a new recruit, he had not fully adapted to it yet. Mcgusides and his teammates quickly ran back into the infantry formation, while Arsines and the other officers looked nervously ahead. The Persia cavalry was fast, and they were very close to the infantry formation. "Javelins!" Arsines roared, and the well-prepared soldiers threw the javelins in their hands. This was a more terrible wave of death than the previous rain of arrows. The armors of the Persia cavalry and war horse were easily pierced by the heavy javelins, and they fell in droves amidst screams and wails. At the same time, it also hindered the advance of the cavalry behind. Taking advantage of the chaos, the rear phalanx quickly rushed forward after throwing the javelins and joined the front phalanx. At the same time, some of the light infantry who had not retreated to the rear in time were blocked outside the formation. The undead cavalrymen who were fortunate enough to dodge the long-range attacks never expected that the Dionysian army formation could remain intact after the impact of the chariots and war elephants. Even though they were astonished, as the most elite and most ferocious soldiers of Persia, they continued to charge forward without the slightest hesitation in the face of the heavily guarded shield formation and spear wall. Although the dense javelins hit the war horse, they could not stop the huge kinetic energy contained in the galloping of the war horse, which weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. Boom! 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 The tremors continued, accompanied by cries of alarm. The soldiers in front of them were sent flying, and a small gap instantly appeared in the formation of the army in the middle. Unfortunately, the Persia cavalry only had 3 horizontal rows, and they had been weakened by the arrows and javelins. After this round of collision, they could no longer maintain their formation. The infantry of Persia was still halfway forward, so the soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia quickly eliminated the undead cavalry who had fallen into the formation. "Your Majesty, it seems that our infantry phalanx has blocked the attack of the Persia cavalry, and there are not too many casualties. We don't need to use the reserves for the time being. Let's replace them." Felicius, who had been paying close attention to the battle in the middle, said happily. When Amyntas, Epiphanes, and the other veteran generals heard this, they all breathed a sigh of relief. They had been in the army all their lives and had rich experience in war, but they had never encountered such a thrilling scene as today's battle, where chariots, war elephants, and armored cavalry took turns to attack the formation. Although they had planned it carefully in advance, they were still nervous. Diver's expression was calm as he stared straight ahead. Countless silhouettes could be vaguely seen on the dust-filled battlefield. The infantry of Persia is coming up, and their cavalry on the flanks should have started attacking too. The Dever said calmly. He paused for a moment and asked, "Have our stone throwers started attacking?" The all-out attack of Persia had just begun. The Bali stone throwers were on the flanks of the army, and they were 8 to 9 miles away from the command center in the middle. No matter how fast the messengers ran, they could not reach the Devers in an instant. Felicius was speechless, but Tormid, who was next to him, responded quickly, "Your Majesty, please rest assured." Although the citizens of the Bali Ali Empire were rarely recruited after the Bali Ali Empire was incorporated into the kingdom, they have participated in the training of the Iberian military camp all year round, and there is no problem in their coordination with the other troops. I believe that they will complete the task that Your Majesty has given them. The Devers nodded and said leisurely, "As long as we can defeat the cavalry of Persia, I have nothing to worry about in this war." Go! Go! Yo! Yo! Amidst the continuous shouts of various tones, more than 30,000 cavalry on both flanks began to advance one after another, like a flood overflowing a dam. Their momentum was far more terrifying than the attack of the infantry in the middle. Looking at the wall of dust rolling in the distance, Husius, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Legion, did not look nervous at all. He even looked back leisurely. 450 meters. 450 meters. 450 meters. The observers at the forefront of the two ends of the Daionia army reported the distance between the Persia cavalry and the army to the Bali stone throwers at the rear of the army. These soldiers had no other protection except for a catapult and a few lead bags. After the cavalry on the opposite side moved, they had already begun to swing the catapult under the command of the team officer. Release. Under the orders of the officers, the soldiers of Bali Ali threw out the lead pellets in the rope with all their might. Then, they put the smallest type of lead shot, according to the many tests conducted by the Ministry of Military Affairs. An excellent Balearic catapult could throw this type of lead shot over a distance of about 400 meters, into the rope. Then, they waved the catapult and threw the lead shot again. They repeated the process without stopping. Even if a lead pellet the size of a red date were to hit someone, it would not cause too much damage. However, when such a lead pellet fell from the sky, it would cause a lot of trouble for the Persian mixed cavalry that was speeding up. No matter if it landed on the cavalry or the war horses, it would easily cause them to fall over, or even die under the hooves of the cavalry behind them. Especially when the camel cavalry that was running at the front was hit by the lead pellet and fell over, its huge body would become a huge obstacle, tripping over its teammates that were unable to dodge in time. The Persia mixed cavalry formation on both flanks was originally loose, but after the attack, their formation became even looser. Each of them had a line of defense that was 2 miles long and nearly 1 mile thick. The 4,000 lead shot fell from 450 meters to 150 meters. In fact, it did not cause too many casualties to the Persia cavalry, but it continued to fall like hail. From 450 meters to 150 meters, the Bali Ali stone throwers threw 5 rounds, continuously causing damage to the Persia cavalry. Not only did it make the formation of the Persia cavalry more sparse, but it also forced them to slow down and lower their morale. 150 meters. 150 meters. When the observer's voice reached the light infantry in front of the stone throwers, nearly 10,000 archers on both sides of the Daionia formation shot their arrows almost at the same time. At the same time, Cuccio said loudly, "Next, it's our cavalry's turn." When the flag bearer next to him heard this, he immediately waved the fluttering flag and pointed it forward. The Daionia cavalry began to move forward slowly on their war horses. The formation of the Daionia cavalry was the opposite of that of the Persia mixed cavalry. The war horses were very close to each other, and the formation only had 2 horizontal lines, so the length of the formation was nearly 2 miles. After receiving the order to attack, the Numidian light cavalry that was originally in a loose formation at the rear quickly moved horizontally to the outermost area with bows and javelins in their hands, revealing the thousands of light-armored soldiers that were hiding behind them. These light-armored soldiers, armed with leather shields and short swords, quickly followed the cavalry in front of them. In order to avoid accidentally injuring their own cavalry, the Daionia archers on both sides only shot 2 rounds of arrows. But because their number was more than 3 times that of the stone throwers, and the lethality of the arrows was higher than the lead shot, the damage to the Persia cavalry was greater. The smug Maldonios did not expect the cunning Daionia to ambush the light infantry behind the cavalry. Since he led the cavalry forward, there was a non-stop rain of stones in the air, followed by arrows that blotted out the sky. The cavalry guards around him gradually became sparse, and even he himself was hit by an arrow. Fortunately, his thick scale armor blocked it and did not cause a fatal injury. With a lingering fear in his heart, he desperately urged the speed of his horse. There was only one thought in his mind: engage the Daionia cavalry as soon as possible, defeat them, and everything will be safe. However, when he saw the approaching Daionia cavalry, he was stunned. The Daionia cavalry was one after another, like a fast-moving long wall. He had never seen such a cavalry charge in his decades of military career. In fact, Daionia's military training occasionally included such a wall charge training, but this was the first time it was used in actual combat, especially in such an important battle. So, Cuccio, who was leading the cavalry forward, was sweating profusely. The young Daionia cavalry did not think so much. They held a spear in one hand and pulled the reins with the other, leaning forward with their legs constantly putting pressure on the war horse. Go! The rapid speed of the war horse made their blood boil, and the comrades next to them made them feel at ease. So, in the face of the approaching enemy cavalry, they were fearless. In a short distance of 100 meters, the rapid speed of the horses made it difficult for the Daionia cavalry formation to remain compact, but the 2 armies were already close. In an instant, the cavalry collided with each other, blood splattered, spears broke, soldiers fell to the ground, and the war horse wailed. The zigzagging cavalry formation of Daionia disappeared in the blink of an eye. But at the same time, the momentum of the Persia cavalry was also curbed, and the cavalry battlefield basically came to a standstill. Maldonios, who fell from his horse, staggered to his feet with the help of his guards. He pulled out the sword at his waist and was about to lead his guards to kill the enemy, who also fell from their horses. But then, he was horrified to see countless Daionia soldiers in black helmets and black armor, armed with leather shields and daggers, pouring out from the gap between the cavalry and killing them. The cunning Daionia actually hid their infantry behind the cavalry. Seeing this, Maldonios trembled all over, and his mind went blank. "My lord, let's go." The guards hurriedly carried Maldonios on their backs and fled in panic. The Persia cavalry, who had lost their advantage in speed, was no match for the well-trained Daionia light cavalry in close combat. And the Persia light cavalry, such as the Scythian cavalry, who did not participate in the charge, were pinned down by the Numidian light cavalry and could not provide support. The mixed Persia cavalry was completely at a disadvantage under the attack of the Daionia light cavalry. This was the reason why the Devers asked the Daionia cavalry to attack in such a dense linear formation. Seeing the enemy approaching cautiously with round shields and bayonets, Arthenes knew that they were the Greek soldiers hired by Persia mentioned by the legion commander. "Traitors!" He spat contemptuously, then shouted, "Javelins!" The well-prepared soldiers hurled the only javelin they had left. This did not cause any damage to the well-prepared Greek mercenaries, but it stopped them temporarily. "Charge!" Arsenes shouted again. "Hades!" The soldiers roared in unison and rushed toward the enemy 30 meters away. The infantry of both sides began to fight in the middle, left, and right of the long front line of more than 10 miles. The battle was finally in full swing. Even though the Dionysian army had a big advantage in close combat, the outcome of the infantry confrontation would not be decided in a short period of time. Moreover, the Persia knew the weakness of their army, so they deliberately made some changes to it. In addition to the Greek mercenaries and the undead army, who were not weak in close combat, they also equipped the tough Khaldan, Dukia, and other mountain tribes with iron helmets, chain armors, copper shields, and one-handed hammers, hoping that they could fight against the Daionia soldiers. Unfortunately, shortly after the battle began, the Dukia and Axicant warriors suddenly retreated under the command of big leader Remy and the other leaders. At the same time, they shouted, "We lost, we lost." The Persia general who was in charge of supervising the troops panicked when he saw this change. He even tried to send the law enforcement team next to him to kill the Dukia warriors who were leading the escape, forcing them to stop running and return to fight. However, the Xianxia warriors were prepared to retreat. How could the law enforcement team stop the attack of thousands of Dukia warriors? They were quickly defeated, and even the Persia general was cut down. The retreat of the Xianxia troops caused a gap of nearly 200 meters suddenly appeared in the infantry line of the Persia army's right flank. The soldiers of the 11th Daionia Legion followed closely behind the Dukia soldiers and rushed into the gap. Under the command of the team officers, they quickly moved forward instead of immediately attacking the enemies on both sides of the gap. This allowed the 18th and 19th Legions, who were in reserve, to continue pouring into the gap. The sudden retreat of the Xianxia warriors also seriously affected the Dukia warriors on both sides, especially when they saw the Daionia soldiers continuously rushing through the gap and appearing behind them. One could imagine the panic in their hearts, and their fighting spirit plummeted rapidly. Not far behind the formation formed by the Dukia warriors were the Persia archers. They followed their own infantry formation and were originally prepared to use the few arrows they had left to attack the rear of the Daionia infantry formation from afar, providing support to the troops in front. This was the traditional tactic of the Persia army. Now, seeing the Dukia warriors in front of them being routed as soon as the battle began, and even killing the supervising troops, they were all shocked. At this critical moment, the commander of the archer unit resolutely ordered the archers to draw their daggers and go forward to meet the enemy, in order to block the gap and prevent the collapse of the front line. Letting the light infantry face the Dukia warriors and the Legion of Dionysia, who were equipped with excellent weapons, was simply a joke with their lives. However, at this time, the archers showed the vigor of the Persia people. They gathered from all directions and launched a fierce battle with the enemy, trying in vain to maintain the front line. At the same time, they also sent messengers to quickly rush back to their own formation to ask for help. When Artaxerxes learned of the terrible situation on the right flank, he was so scared that his face turned pale. "Tarabasis, now what should we do?" he asked his most trusted advisor in panic. Tarabasis was also panicking, but he forced himself to be calm. "Your Majesty, the archers led by General Alteos cannot resist the enemy for long. We must press forward with our reserve troops as soon as possible. Our military strength is strong. As long as we can restabilize the front line of the Dukia people, the advantage will still be on our side." Artaxerxes regained some confidence after hearing his words. Not only did he immediately issue an order, but he also scolded, "Cursed Dukia people, why did I believe these shameless villains before? Wait until I obtain victory in the battle, I will definitely annihilate them completely." "Your Majesty, the Persia's reserve troops have moved." Felicius, who received the news, reported to the Devers. As soon as he finished speaking, Tormid shouted excitedly, "Look! The king of Persia has also come up." The Devers narrowed their eyes, and their sharp gaze pierced through the soldiers fighting in front of them. They saw the Persia's flags fluttering in the wind gradually becoming bigger in their field of vision. They could not help but laugh. When Artaxerxes ordered all the reserve troops to press forward, his carriage had no choice but to follow the main army and move forward slowly. If he still stayed where he was, there would only be the royal guards around him. There were only a few thousand of them, and they were too eye-catching, making him feel very unsafe. The driver carefully drove the 4 Nicaea horses that carried the royal carriage. These white horses were produced in the Nicaea Plains, the most fertile land in the Zagros Valley. They were regarded as the best and tallest horses by the Medes. They were once offered to Assyria as a tribute, and the Persia royal family even sanctified them. They claimed that the white horses of Nicaea were sacred objects given to the Achaemenid royal family by the gods. Other than the Persia officials authorized by the king, no one else was allowed to own them. They followed the reserve troops and advanced towards the battlefield where the fierce battle was taking place. The slightly anxious Artaxerxes felt that the reserve troops were advancing too slowly. Just as he was about to order Tarabasis to urge the troops in front to move faster, he saw the strategist suddenly stop the war horse, put his hand on his forehead, and looked up at the sky. The royal guards beside him also did the same thing. Artaxerxes subconsciously looked at the sky in front of him. At this time, the sun was already leaning towards the west. Artaxerxes hurriedly looked up. Even with the dust blocking his view, he felt that the sun was particularly dazzling. He quickly closed his eyes. Just as he was about to open them again, he heard Tarabasis shouting in panic, "Ballistae! It's the stones fired by the ballistae of Dionia." Artaxerxes was shocked. Ignoring the stinging pain in his eyes, he hurriedly opened his eyes. He saw more than a dozen round black shadows flying past his head at high speed, followed by a roar from behind. Artaxerxes looked back. More than a dozen meters away from him, dust was flying everywhere. Dozens of round stones the size of coconuts had smashed a hole in the ground. Artaxerxes immediately broke out in a cold sweat. "Your Majesty, the people of Dionia are trying to attack you with ballistae. Quick! Retreat now." Tarabasis did not ask for the permission of the king of Persia and asked the carriage to turn around and retreat. The king of Persia's luxurious carriage was pulled by 4 Nizia horses. Not only was it larger than ordinary carriages, but it was also much heavier. It was not easy to make a quick turn, let alone make a U-turn. Moreover, the carriage was surrounded by royal guards. It was difficult to clear enough space in a short time. Meanwhile, at the rear of the Dionia's infantry formation, a simple 3-meter-tall sentry tower had been erected at some point in time. Under the control of the workers from the engineering battalion, the experienced ballista soldiers were standing on top of the sentry tower, looking ahead. They were quickly correcting the firing data of the ballista based on the landing point of the first round of stone projectiles and the position of the Persia's carriage. At the same time, they reported to the ballista soldiers beside the sentry tower loudly. The cannoneers quickly adjusted the angle of the cannons and the strength of the bowstring. Soon, the second round of stone bullets was shot out. At this time, the carriage that Artaxerxes was in was still turning around when he saw dozens of stone bullets falling from the sky. The first one landed beside the carriage, smashing a royal guard into pieces. His brain and blood even splattered on Artaxerxes' face. In an instant, Artaxerxes' mind was blank. He stood there in a daze, not reacting to the panicked shouts of the guards. Boom! Another stone bullet landed in front of the white horse of Nizia, splashing dust on their bodies. The white horse realized the danger and struggled to break free from the carriage's yoke. It did not listen to the driver's command at all. The carriage shook violently, and the absent-minded Artaxerxes was thrown out. "Your Majesty!" The royal guards panicked and rushed to the rescue. At this moment, a stone bullet hit the carriage. Instantly, wood splinters flew everywhere, and screams were heard. The senior generals of Persia all knew that the ballista was a siege weapon made by the Dionia. Siege weapons were rarely used in field battles between armies, so they fell into a dead end. They never thought that the Dionysian army would use ballistas to attack them in a battle. Therefore, they were completely unprepared and entered the range of the ballistas. In fact, before the battle started, the Devers had ordered the deployment of 30 ballistas at the rear of the middle road. Although they wanted to use the tactic of decapitation, they did not have much hope for it to work. This was because, according to the Devers' knowledge, in previous battles, the king of Persia, Artaxerxes, rarely went to the front line. The focus of the ballista attack was not on the middle road, but on the right flank of Persia, the reserve troops behind Dukya's troops. They wanted to prevent them from rescuing the front in time. According to the military system of Dionia, a legion was equipped with 10 ballistas. Therefore, there were nearly 200 ballistas in the army led by the Devers, 170 of which were concentrated at the rear of the left flank of the Dionia army, facing Dukya's troops. At the same time that the Zokant tribe feigned defeat, the ballista troops here also erected a sentry tower in time to closely observe the movements of the enemy's reserve troops. Just as the ballistas in the middle road were aimed at the carriage of the king of Persia, some of the reserve troops on the right flank had already been bombarded by stone bullets. Because they were in a hurry to rescue, they had long entered the range of the ballistas. A single ballista's stone projectile didn't actually cause much damage, but 170 ballistas concentrated firing not only had an astonishing momentum, but also a terrifying killing effect. As long as the projectile landed in the general vicinity, it could create a small bloody scene. The frontline troops that Artaxerxes had arranged for this battle were either the elites of the Persia army or the fierce subordinate race troops. As for the reserve troops, most of them had average combat power. The troops of the Caspian states behind Dukya's troops were not even willing to contribute to Persia. They came here just to deal with some errands, but in the end, they were asked by the people of Persia to rush forward to rescue them. After a few rounds of stone bullets, their low morale was completely gone, and many of them fled in panic. During the time when the messengers on the right flank of Persia went to ask for help from the king of Persia, the soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia, who were fully prepared in advance, poured into the gap in the Persia's defensive line. Together with the warriors of the Xianxia tribe, they launched a fierce attack on the archers of Persia who had rushed to seal the gap. When the reserve troops of Persia were dispatched, the archers of Persia, who had suffered a large number of casualties, had been forced to retreat. Taking advantage of the chaos caused by the attack of the ballistas, countless soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia continuously rushed through the gap in the Persia's defensive line, and turned to attack the flanks and rear of Dukya's troops on both sides of the gap. The morale of the Dukya warriors was already low, and they were attacked from both the front and rear, and they quickly collapsed. Some even responded to the warriors of the Xianxia tribe and joined the side of Dionia. When the messengers reported the situation of the battle on the left flank to the command center, there was a burst of cheers and laughter. Whether it was the old generals or the young staff officers, they were all excited, because they knew that victory had been decided. With a smile on his face, Devers asked, "How is the situation of the cavalry on both flanks?" Felicius replied in a loud and clear voice, "Your Majesty, the Persia cavalry has begun to retreat. Our cavalry is reorganizing their formation and preparing to attack the flanks of the enemy's formation on both flanks." "Very good. Very good. Very good." Devers praised 3 times in a row, and the smile on his face became even wider. His heart was completely relaxed, and he turned around to look at his old comrades, who were also chatting and laughing in a relaxed manner. "The weather is very hot. Everyone must be thirsty, right? Herney, let everyone drink the water you brought." "Your Majesty, drinking water is too boring. We want to go to the Babylonian palace to drink good wine." Amyntas joked loudly. "Ha ha ha." Everyone laughed. Although the soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia continued to defeat the enemy on the left flank and widen the gap in the enemy's formation, and although the cavalry and light armor of Dionia turned to attack the enemy's flank after defeating the cavalry of Persia, the Dionysian army had already grasped the key to victory, but for the huge battlefield that stretched for more than 10 miles, complete victory would not come soon. It was almost dusk when the Persia army completely collapsed. The last to fight were the Persia undead army and the Greek mercenaries in the middle, so they were surrounded and unable to escape. This major battle caused the elite troops of Persia to suffer heavy losses. The senior Persia generals such as Maldonios, Halpurgos, and Pisididae were either captured or killed in battle. The only regret was that Artaxerxes escaped from the battlefield. Therefore, the victorious Devers issued an order: the cavalry continued to pursue the defeated army, and the legions were to shorten the rest time and speed up the march to Babylon. The fastest pursuing force was, of course, the Numidian light cavalry. They did not have much of an advantage in the battle against the light cavalry of Persia such as the Scythian cavalry. However, because the main force of the Persia cavalry was defeated, the opponents lost the will to fight and fled, so the Numidian cavalry began to rest in the second half of the battle. Therefore, they had more physical strength than the other forces. The rapid advance of the Numidian cavalry left the city of Nicoponia, which was not far from the battlefield, unprepared. When it was taking in the defeated soldiers, it broke into the city and had no choice but to surrender. Before entering the city to rest, the Devers sent messengers to the west to tell Leotychides, who was rushing over, that the Dionysian army had completely defeated the Persia army, and that he did not need to lead the army to join up with them. Instead, he should return to Asia Minor and conquer the area completely. Early the next morning, the Dionia cavalry continued their pursuit eastward and caught up with Artaxerxes and the royal guards beside a tributary on the north bank of the Euphrates River. At this time, the king of Persia was completely different from the high-spirited appearance he had when he led the mighty army out of Babylon. After the army was defeated, the soldiers fled in all directions, and the prestige of the king was gone. Even many of his most trusted royal guards fled during the night, and there were less than 500 guards around him. After being attacked by the ballista and falling off the carriage, he fell into a coma at the age of more than 60. He had not woken up yet, which also slowed down their escape. After being caught up by the Daionia cavalry, Trabasus, who was still following the king of Persia, led the remaining guards and simply chose to surrender. At the same time, he asked for the courtesy that Artaxerxes deserved as a king. The Devers who arrived later readily agreed and sent the best medical personnel in the army to treat him. With the king of Persia in hand, the Dionysian army's attack eastward became smoother. Korsodi, Talmand, and other important towns on the Euphrates River opened their gates and surrendered. At the beginning of December, the Dionysian army entered the Babylonian region. When the Devers' army passed through a small village, the old generals in the army became excited, because the name of the village was Cunasac. Back then, we camped here. I still remember that the tent I lived in seemed to be in this position. Over there. That's the battlefield. We defeated the left wing of the king of Persia with a single charge. It's a pity that little Cyrus was too reckless. Otherwise, we would have won that battle. What's there to feel pity about? Fortunately, he failed. That's why His Majesty stood out and led us to establish Daionia. That's why we can return here today as conquerors. That's right, we all have to thank His Majesty. Long live His Majesty. Long live His Majesty. When the old generals were touched by the scene and sincerely cheered for the Devers to express their gratitude, the king of Daionia, the new overlord of the entire Mediterranean Devers, sat motionless on his war horse like a clay sculpture. He stared at the empty space where Georges stood in front of him, and his heart was filled with emotion. It was there that he was reborn from a 21st-century China citizen to a lowly mercenary in ancient Greece. From the very beginning, he struggled to survive, to the hard work of establishing Daionia, and struggled hard in this strange world for more than 30 years. At this moment, scenes of the past flashed quickly in his mind, like a dream. Report. Your Majesty, Babylon has opened its gates and surrendered. Commander Cutchius has led the vanguard into the city. The shout of the herald woke up the dazed Devers. He looked around at the cheering soldiers around him, and a smile slowly bloomed on his face. No, this is not a dream. This is the turbulent ancient Mediterranean world. And I, Hades Devers, am now the most powerful man in the world. He waved his right hand vigorously. Let's go. Let's go to Babylon. Yes, Your Majesty. The crowd responded in unison. Thousands of soldiers excitedly surrounded the great king, galloping toward the eastern city that had opened its arms to them. End of the book. When I finished the last chapter of ancient Greece, Hegemon of the Mediterranean, I felt both lost and relieved. I still remember 5 years ago, after a period of boredom, I finally made up my mind to rewrite the ancient Greek story to make up for the guilt of not updating it. At the same time, it was also to fulfill a long-cherished wish that had always been in my heart. At that time, I only had a rough outline and quickly started writing. I never expected that I would write for nearly 5 years, including the time I had to prepare the manuscript in advance, and the word count was close to 4 million. During this long period of time, my life and work have changed a lot, and I have experienced many difficulties in the process of writing. I have thought of giving up many times, but the passion in writing and the long-cherished wish in my heart told me that I must persist. Coupled with the countless lovely readers who accompanied me on the lonely road of writing, it is your constant encouragement and support that made me fight until now. Ancient Greece, Hegemon of the Mediterranean, is finally finished. You may think that it was a bit rushed, but in my opinion, it basically achieved my expected goal and completed the outline I had prepared in advance. It is the first work in my online writing career that has truly finished. Campus romance doesn't count, it was broken twice in the middle and ended abruptly. It is also a big achievement, and it is worth celebrating. However, as it is my first time to complete such a long novel, my lack of experience has exposed some shortcomings. I think there are a few main shortcomings. First, the characters are not depicted enough. Most of the characters are just symbols, and they did not leave any impression on the readers. Second, the process of Dionia's rise to hegemony was too easy. Some unprecedented new systems formulated by the protagonist had an impact on the ancient West, and the resulting conflicts were described too superficially. There was no more complex interpretation and deeper exploration. Third, I lack a comprehensive grasp of the entire grand historical process in the book. I don't know what should be written in detail, and the countermeasures taken by various forces against the rise of Daionia and the armed conflicts that occurred were not described reasonably. The reasons for these shortcomings, I think, are my lack of writing skills and talent. I can't plan and control the overall situation as well as those great gods, and at the same time, write tens of thousands of words every day. Secondly, I don't have enough time, especially after the manuscript storage is used up. I still have to work during the day and do housework at night. I can only rely on some fragments of time to update every day. Even if I complete the task, I don't have more time to carefully sculpt the characters and plot. Another main reason was that he was not as energetic as before. Writing requires a lot of energy, and when I write, I like to put myself in the shoes of every character I create, to imagine their emotions, their conversations, and their reactions in battle. My entire brain is working non-stop. More than 10 years ago, when I was writing Campus Love Log, I could stay up all night writing without feeling tired. I could even immerse myself in it after I finished writing and couldn't come out for a while. Now that I'm in my 40s, I'll feel tired after thinking for an hour. If I'm disturbed by patients or chores at home, I'll feel very annoyed. It'll take me a lot of effort to get back to the situation I've been thinking about. That's why I instinctively avoid making the plot more complicated so that I can complete my task more easily. In short, I've finished this book, but I have a lot of regrets. These regrets will become the motivation for me to write the next book. I'll spend more time to think about the outline in detail, build the image and personality of each character, perfect the setting, and enrich the plot. I hope it'll be better than this book by then. I've said so much because I have a lot of reluctance in my heart. I don't want to let go of the book that I've spent so much effort on come to an end, and I don't want to part with you guys who have always supported and encouraged me. I hope I can meet you guys again when I upload the next book. However, the interval may be longer, because before I prepare the next book, I need to rest for a while. After all, in the past 4 years, I haven't had a good time to relax, including during the Spring Festival. Finally, I'll tell you a little secret. In my original idea, the whole book will end after Daionia defeats Persia and becomes the ruler of the Mediterranean Sea. There was supposed to be an epilogue, but after thinking about it again and again, in order to leave some space and not stand out, I deleted it. Now, I'll tell you the general plot of the epilogue. In 2020, when the city of Xianxia in Camino was vigorously renovating the old city, the construction team excavated an ancient tomb in the western part of the Wei River Plain. After the identification of the cultural relics in the tomb by archaeologists, they believe that the tomb came from the Daionia Empire, which dominated the West more than 2,000 years ago. It's highly likely that it's the cenotaph of the founding emperor of Daionia, the Devers. This news not only shocked the international archaeological community, but also the entire Western world. In history, Daionia was a great empire that spanned across Europe and Asia, ruling the West for 300 years. At its peak, its territory not only included the whole of Western Europe, the whole of North Africa, the whole of Asia Minor, and more than half of the Near East. It even extended its influence to Eastern Europe and India. Although it eventually fell apart due to its own decline and the invasion of the barbarians, later generations of Western European monarchs with great talent and strategy dreamed of reviving its former glory. There were also countless Western literati who fantasized and eulogized the greatness of that era. However, no matter how hard they tried, the entire West was still divided by small countries, and it was difficult to unify them. The great achievements of Daionia have always been a beautiful vision of the later generations in the West, but because of this, the cultural relics of the Daionia Empire were highly respected by the West. When the news spread around the world, it was met with angry questions from countless Western people. How could the clothes of the Emperor Devers, whom they respected as the Emperor of the Ages, be buried in Camino, which was thousands of miles away? But soon, the current head of the Devers family, the oldest and noblest descendant of the royal family in Europe, publicly announced that it was very possible. He also showed his grandfather part of the diary of the past emperors of Daionia, which had always been kept secret. He emphasized that the founding Emperor Devers had repeatedly mentioned the faraway countries in the east to the second emperor, Protokatax, who was known as the Compassionate. In his later years, the Devers also expressed his yearning for the faraway east to the third emperor, Christos, who was known as the Wise. He also claimed that Hades had given him an oracle several times in his dreams, telling him that it was best to bury his clothes in the faraway east after his death, so as to ensure the long-term stability of the empire. Immediately after that, the most authoritative association of archaeologists in Europe also announced to the public that they had carefully searched through all the historical records of the Empire of Dionia and found that during the reign of the fifth emperor, Silesius, who was known as the Conqueror, had indeed sent out a large team of emissaries, claiming that they were going to search for the faraway east. However, there were no other historical records after that. Therefore, the Western people were in an uproar. The people of every Western country even held demonstrations and unanimously protested that if this was really the cenotaph of the Emperor Devers, the government of Camino should return it to the West. All the governments of the Western countries complied with the demands of the people and put pressure on the government of Camino. In the face of strong international pressure, the government of Camino finally agreed that if this was really the cenotaph of the Emperor Devers, then it was the wealth of all mankind and should be shared by all countries. Soon, the Western archaeological team led by the descendants of the royal family of Devers joined the archaeological team of Camino. At the request of the people of the world, the entire archaeological process was broadcasted live. The rusty golden crown, the helmet, the golden breastplate, the sword, the rotting and tattered robe. After every item was taken out of the tomb, the head of the family of Devers would vividly describe some historical anecdotes about the item. The audience in front of the TV was also fascinated by the story. Now, it was completely confirmed that this was the cenotaph of the Emperor Devers. The audience was looking forward to the archaeologists of the West and China as soon as possible to restore these items to their former glory with modern technology. A few days later, the rusty spots on the golden crown, helmet, breastplate, and sword were all removed and shone brightly. Moreover, the Western experts also discovered that these items were engraved with the same inscriptions. However, the experts of Camino widened their eyes in surprise because these inscriptions were in the simplified Chinese of Camino. Guess what these words are? Dear brothers and sisters, let us meet again in the next installment. End of chapter 13:19. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video to support the channel.